My name is Luke Broyles. I am making this video because 5 months ago, in January 2023, I had no following on Twitter. I had less than 100 followers, probably 75 or 80 or so. Now, at the time of this recording, I have 14.6 thousand followers on Twitter, which is a surprise for many people, including myself. I have been asked many times, how did I gain so many followers so quickly? And I honestly believe the simple answer is that I presented ideas that were applicable to people's everyday lives and understandings of the world in ways that were engaging for them. So clearly that my content mostly focuses around Bitcoin and technology and technological change. However, again, I don't think it's those topics. I think it is the ability to communicate those topics to people in ways that apply to their everyday lives. And so as I think about that perhaps being my largest strength, or one of my largest strengths, I think about how Bitcoin adoption is being slowed. And I think the main way in which it's being slowed is by having people not properly understand why Bitcoin matters, why it applies to them, or why they should even care, both for themselves and for the world in its entirety. And so the attempt of this video today is to walk through a project, walk through the script of a film that I'm working on to attack that very problem. Basically, to make a film that defines the problem of fiat, defines the problem of inflation, defines the problem of the lack of Bitcoin so clearly that the answer that is Bitcoin, the solution that is Bitcoin, becomes self-evident. Because I think, honestly, so many people don't look further into Bitcoin and don't seriously consider the rate of technological change because they believe it doesn't apply to their own lives. And so I believe if we take the strength of telling a story in a way that people actually find interesting, they might actually enjoy it, and they might actually want to learn more about that. And so being a storyteller and trying to tell a story, the attempt of this film is to tell the human story of technological change, paradigm shifts, and how Bitcoin very likely is going to play a key pivotal role in that story. So I believe ultimately it comes down to presentation, it comes down to content, and it comes down to ideas. So in this presentation today, I'm going to focus entirely on content and entirely on the idea of the film itself. There's just going to be very little flashy in this presentation, the hope being that if this presentation alone, purely by its content, is engaging enough for you and for others that are watching, perhaps that could be a convincing enough presentation for you to help assist making the actual film possible, to where it is visually engaging, to where it can reach a wider audience, and to where more people would be interested in the ideas I'm going to lay out here for you. So I'm going to walk through the points of the movie step by step here. So without further ado, let's go. The first thing to consider is that all life forms are energy. Essentially, what life is it takes in energy, it consumes that energy, it processes that energy, transforms that energy, and then has a given amount of waste. And so ultimately, if a life form is giving off more energy than it's consuming, then it eventually dies. This is true for all life forms, not just for human beings, whether we're talking about large creatures on the African Sahara, or we're talking about whales, or we're talking about insects, amphibians, mammals like us, or even the smallest germs. All of these life forms require energy to survive. It's the very essence of life, taking in energy, preserving energy, storing it for the future, and then giving that energy back to the world. And so life forms, because they're based upon energy, are able to grow, are able to expand their spheres of influence, are able to build their bodies and expand as a function of this equation of energy in every single organism, every single ecosystem on the planet. The more energy a person is able to take in, the more they're able to fight diseases, the more energy they're expended, the more energy they're able to expend in exercise, the more energy they're able to expend on brain development. Energy is essential for life. It is critical for life, all life forms. And if we think of human civilizations as essentially a network of life forms, a network of human beings, what we can think of civilizations are as like macroorganisms, essentially, in the same way that a cell has many organelles and many parts of the cell that make that cell impossible. You basically have human societies functioning as life forms. And just like real life forms, these macro life forms of human civilizations only survive if they consume, if they bring in more energy than what they're able to expend. If a society is not able to produce enough energy in the form of food, in the form of caloric energy, then eventually all the citizens of that civilization starve. If the rules and instructions of a cell, DNA, are not clear, the cell collapses. If the rules and structure of human civilization are unclear, that civilization collapses. And so in the same way that the instructions, the energy production, and the energy consumption of a cell, of a bacterium, or of a large organism are very complicated and very fine-tuned, it's the same thing for human society. Energy is essential. Now, what is this equation that makes these things function so well? It is a simple equation of a cost of energy versus the reward of that energy. So like I said before, if the cost of the energy is lower or equal to or lower the benefit associated with the energy, then that effort is worthwhile. If you are a cheetah on a savanna and you are going to expend a given amount of energy to chase a gazelle, and the meal that you will attain from that gazelle does not have the same amount of energy intake as it would take to attack that gazelle, well, then the energy cost is no longer worth it. And the same thing's true with a society. If you have one nation that wants to go to war with another nation, and the reward simply isn't worth it for the cost of attack, well, then guess what? That nation is not going to attack because it's not worth it from that perspective of an energy equation. And so when we think of forms of technology, what is technology? Technology is ways at which we increase our ability to create, consume, and channel energy. So in a way, you can think of technology as upgrading societies, upgrading these larger macro organisms of human culture and of human society. And so these new upgrades make inferior forms of channeling energy obsolete. If you have one organism and another organism, and one organism can channel energy better, it dominates the older organism every single time. This is a problem with invasive species. This is what we see in nature. The organism that can channel energy in a superior fashion dominates the inferior organism. And in the same way it's with an organism, it's the same way with a society. And that society upgrades as a function of that technology that's able to transfer, consume, and produce this energy. And so new technological paradigms make old technological paradigms obsolete because they are able to channel energy more efficiently. So for example, when we have a society that is able to upgrade from hunting and gathering to agriculture, that society is going to dominate every other society that cannot do that. When you have a society that is upgrading from spears and bows and arrows to cannons and gunpowder, that society will dominate over the other one. When you have one paradigm that is using bronze, that paradigm is going to be inferior to the paradigm that can channel steel. And this is why innovations and innovation cycles in society happen all at once, because once a threshold is breached, there are a multitude of innovations that are able to become possible. Take the Industrial Revolution, for example. Once humanity has crossed the threshold into steel and the industrial process, all of a sudden there's a huge array of new opportunities, of new innovations, and new technologies that are able to channel larger amounts of energy. When you have an ancient society, that society is not able to refine more advanced materials and products. You know, for example, the Romans cannot manufacture plastics. They simply don't have the infrastructure to support it. And so because these technologies are inherently have this network effect where one innovation leads to other innovations within that order of magnitude of development, what that means is that the old paradigm inherently always collapses behind it. So you have new innovation that's also creating this destruction behind it again and again and again. And so the beautiful thing is that in the process of creating new forms of channeling energy, and in the light, despite these old forms of energy declining, humanity prospers. When humanity upgrades from using fire to using candles to using incandescent light bulbs to using LED light bulbs, all these upgrades of energy bring more and more prosperity for humans. Now, why is this? It's because humans are life forms, and as life forms, we thrive. Our luxury, our prosperity, our comfort of life is a function of being able to use energy, of being able to channel energy. We are able to survive because we're able to eat energy. We're able to travel as a function of energy. All prosperity comes down to how much energy are you able to produce, how much energy are you able to use. And so as society advances to greater and greater and greater degrees of upgrading to better forms of energy, society becomes more prosperous as a direct result. And so as we become more prosperous, the cost of energy, the cost of the goods and services that take energy to produce and acquire go down. These costs go down as we upgrade, and as we are able to produce and consume more energy, the cost of these things is able to go down. And so we should assume this continues in the future. Throughout all of human history, we have had dire predictions made about humanity, about civilization, about this and that and the other collapsing. And why is that? It's simply because we are projecting forward current populations and current consumption of energy based on given production rates of energy. And that's simply not how innovation works. We always innovate ourselves out of problems. We always find new solutions. For example, famine has been predicted century after century after century, farther back and back and back. Every civilization, essentially, for all of human history, people have said there's not going to be enough food if our population continues to grow at this current rate. There's not going to be enough energy. We're going to destroy our local environment. We're going to destroy our food and this and that, the other. And these things are true if you assume that we're not able to upgrade our energy production and consumption, but we're always able to do that. And so then thus far, at least, we've always been able to innovate ourselves out of these problems. And so the difficult thing is these ideas are very abstract. These ideas of channeling energy, refining energy, moving energy around, it's very abstract. And so what's the way at which we quantify the energy at which we're transferring through our society, both across time and space? Well, the technology we have invented thousands of years ago to do that is money. Money is refined energy. We produce energy in all other facets of society, and that value gets condensed down to monetary value. You have caloric value in the form of food. You have luminosity in that form of energy, in the form of light. You have shelter. You have transportation. You have all these forms of energy. And ultimately, monetary energy is a form of societal trust. A unit of monetary energy is a unit of societal trust into the future. It's inherently an optimistic vision of the future. And so money is this technology at which we quantify value of all other technologies. Money is the thing that prices in all technology. It's the way at which we communicate value with the rest of society. It's the form of energy at which we equate all other forms of energy on the planet with each other. It's our communication mechanism. It's our language at which how we communicate value to each other, where things are needed more, where things are needed less. If a given part of society has a lacking form of energy, the incentive for people to fix that problem will go up as prices go up, because in relation to everything else, that thing is more scarce. That thing is not in great of supply as it needs to be. And so what is that money? What becomes that money? Well, ultimately what becomes that money, that monetary way to store value, and that monetary language of society is ultimately the framework at which has the best qualities. And what are those qualities? Well, one of those qualities is that it has to be consistent. It has to be immutable, meaning that it's not subject to change. It has to have many qualities, which obviously I'm not going to get into here. But essentially, the commodity or the thing on the planet that best fits those qualities becomes the money. For example, gold has become the money for thousands of years in human history. In a similar way, salt was a form of money for a long period of time, as were seashells and rocks and stones and gemstones, and all other kinds of things were forms of money at one point or another. These things were scarce. These things were able to have a large monetary premium. It was ideal for these things to have relatively low utility value, because that would add additional fluctuation. And again, one of the things you need is stability when it comes to money, the supply of money and the demand of money, separate from all other demands in society. And so that's why gold and other things have become money at given points of society. And so as society upgrades in these cycles of innovation and these processes of innovation, we're able to upgrade to new forms of money at which we're able to acquire more. So for example, salt and grain and barter, these kinds of things were the form of money very, very long ago, and copper as well. These things were forms of money. And then eventually humanity upgraded to a new form of energy, And then gold became our monetary standard because now we had more energy to expend because our cost to benefit ratio to acquire gold, to store gold as our monetary store of value and medium of exchange into the future. And that's eventually what we did. And likewise, we upgraded out of gold into our current era of centralized banking because we upgraded to a society where the velocity of money became exponentially more important. The society was advancing exponentially faster as a result of technology improving at an exponential rate. And so that's the world we're in now. And unfortunately, we come to realize these things in history. When we look at these different monetary standards, we see how empires rise and fall, rise and fall, rise and fall. We're taught this in history. And what is one of, if not the baseline reason of which these empires rise and fall? What is one of the ways to quantify this the best? The problem with money up to this point in human history, for all of human history, the problem of money is that humans are corrupt. No human is perfect. And eventually, if you have a form of money that is able to be corrupted by humans, that form of money will become corrupted. So the problem is not a technological problem per se. The real fundamental problem is humans. And we have not had a way to detach humans and human hearts and human morality from money itself. And so what happens when we corrupt the money is we corrupt the incentive structure in society, we corrupt the communication mechanism in society, and we corrupt all forms of energy production, consumption, and communication in society. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that creating money inherently is theft. It inherently violates the law of conservation of energy in a monetary, metaphorical sense, of course. But essentially, when we are able to create money, when we're able to distort money, when we're able to walk back a transaction of money, when we're able to censor others from money, what we're doing is we're distorting energy. Money is monetary energy. And when we print money into existence, what we're doing is we're not merely causing some problem that is on the surface level of society. We're distorting the fundamental baseline of society. We're distorting energy. We're distorting the communication of energy. For example, here, and this is an example that I think is worth it here. I have some bolivars with me here. So let's say, for example, and obviously many people watching this will understand this, but let's say I have one bolivar and you have one bolivar. So you have 100 units, you have 100 monetary units, I have 100 monetary units. These forms of monetary energy are what we use to communicate the relative values of the goods, services, and energy that we have in society. Monetary energy is what we price all of the forms of energy within. And if there's 100 units between us, and somebody else out there is able to create, let's say, 2 more 100 monetary units, then all of a sudden you've doubled the amount of energy. They have printed money into existence, and they have printed energy into existence. And this is simply not how the universe works. It's not how the world works. No organism, again, going back to the metaphors of life forms, no organism is able to chase down its prey for a zero energy expenditure, for a zero energy cost. No society, no empire, no nation is able to wage war against another one without any form of energy cost. You're not able to grow food without the sun expending energy and putting energy into the plant so the plant can grow and provide you fruit. These things simply don't make any sense. And the ability for humans to print more and more and more and more money is printing energy into existence. And this is inherently outside the realm of reality. And so what that means is that as soon as we begin doing that, we doom that form of energy, that form of monetary energy, to resetting back to where it should be. And this is why in history, you see cycle after cycle after cycle, rise and fall of these monetary systems, of these political regimes, and of these societies, and of these cultures again and again and again. These things happen incredibly predictably, unfortunately. Society prospers atop of innovation, atop of upgrading the form of energies, and society then continues to fall and begins to fall as humanity is able to corrupt these ledgers and corrupt these monies, which then distorts so energy production and consumption in society, which leads to more inefficiency. And in the same way that a cell or an organism self-destructs from cancer spreading throughout its body, spreading more and more misinformation to the cells in one's body, it's the same thing with distorting the money and printing energy out of thin air. As soon as a society begins to believe the lie that we can reap without sowing, as soon as society begins to believe the lie that we can elect a given politician or a given king into power, and we can pretend that they are a false god that can print energy out of nothing, then society begins to decline at large. And this decline is extrapolated and escalated by the belief in this lie. And so there are many examples, which I won't get into now, but we see this throughout human history. We see society upgrade and continue to elevate. And then eventually incentives misalign. We become dissatisfied with the forms of energy we have. We become dissatisfied with the slowing and progress that we have. And we burn ourselves with this lie. We distort society with this lie. And then that continues down again. We'll go into many examples in the film of the Boston Tea Party, the French Revolution, World War I, World War II, reigns of communism and Nazism in the 20th century. We could talk about the Chinese empires. We could talk about the Dutch and the English empires and Germanic empires, and on and on and on. And then many of modern day examples too. Obviously, the Venezuelan bolivars, I just gave the example of moments ago. You have Zimbabwe, you have Argentina, you have Turkey, Lebanon. You have many examples today where our ability to believe the lie that we can produce something out of nothing inevitably and ironically leads to the destruction of the things that we have. And so today in the United States and across the world, we have a form of central banking that essentially believes this lie the same way. And we'll get into historical examples of how this has been increasingly a problem over the last 50 years, especially since the early 1970s into today, and how these reserve currencies, these reserve monetary eras of the human race cycle through. As one monetary era declines, let's say as an inferior political era is in decline, you have a superior monetary era that rises up, replacing the need for society of that communications mechanism of monetary energy. And so this cycle continues again and again and again. And this time is no different. This is simply history repeating itself. And what we're seeing is we're seeing many currencies around the world, and this is not exclusive to the US dollar. And that needs to be made very clear here, that the problem is not the US dollar, the problem is not American politics. The problem is nothing in the short term here. As I said before, this is a long-term problem that all societies of function of energy production and consumption, and all that energy production and consumption is denominated in monetary energy. And so when society believes that lie, not just American society, not just society of the last couple decades, couple years, or even couple centuries, but when any society, no matter their ethnicity, no matter their point of time, no matter the kinds of technology they have, no matter how advanced they are, if they believe that lie that they can print energy out of nothing, it is inevitable that that society will continue to decline until that lie is purged from society. And so obviously there are many examples today. You have the stimulus in the United States and across the world in 2020, you have the great financial crisis in 2008, and you have many problems around the world. And so when we take this long view of history, that all life is energy, all organisms are energy, that all society is energy, that all innovation periods in history are simply upgraded from one form of energy to a superior form of energy. When you take these assumptions and when you understand that monetary energy is a form of energy that contains all of these other forms of energy in society, and that this inherent problem of humans having the ability to create this lie and distort this lie into money, then you begin to realize the true magnitude of this problem. And that this time really is no different. What is happening today? Looking back, what is happening today? We are seeing people continue to invest and continue to put money into assets, into real estate and stocks and fine art and gold and things like that. Why? Because we cannot store monetary energy in our underlying form of currency, because we can just create more and more and more. When your monetary energy is able to be created out of nothing, all of a sudden everyone wants to exchange your monetary energy for something that actually requires an energy expenditure, for something that actually has an equation of cost of expenditure versus cost of benefit that actually makes sense. It's actually logical. You don't want to store your energy in paper that could be printed out of thin air. You want to store your energy in something that cannot be printed out of thin air, like a company or like a house or like a piece of property or a piece of land. And so this is what we see today. This is why property values go up. This is why the stock market values go up. Because as energy becomes more abundant, prices should be coming down. The cost of energy should be coming down. The price of real estate should be coming down. We're able to create more and more real estate, more and more companies, more and more value, more and more services at a faster rate at which our population is increasing. And yet prices go up because this monetary energy is not flowing down to the base layer communications layer of the communications language of society, which is the money. It's instead flowing to things on top in assets, speculations, and mixed baskets of goods and services. And so obviously we can get into how the treasury system works. We won't do that here, but that will be done in the film. And what happens is ultimately when this fundamental language is being broken down, all language breaks down in society. All of a sudden we begin redefining words. All of a sudden politicians on all sides of the aisles and all places of the world become more and more polarizing, because as monetary energy is misallocated into assets and misallocated into technologies and other things that it should not be misallocated into at all, you've changed the incentive structure. Society is no longer incentivized on upgrading us to the next level of energy production, because that's not accurately reflected in the monetary layer of society. Instead, we are actively incentivized towards managing and mismanaging and distorting the other forms of energy in society. When the money is sound and the money is fixed and the money is an accurate representation of energy, society is incentivized to produce more energy and produce more prosperity for society. But when the money instead is reliant on distortion, manipulation, and misallocation, then all of a sudden society is incentivized to misallocate the other things and the rest. And this is why much of the world feels that it's becoming further and further distorted from reality. It's why college is getting more and more and more expensive. It's why healthcare is getting more and more and more expensive. It's why politicians are becoming more and more polarized. Society is having less and less trust. When you destroy the fundamental layer of trust in society, aka money, you destroy all trust, you destroy all ability to look forward in the future. As the time horizon of money becomes shorter and shorter and shorter, everyone begins thinking in shorter and shorter and shorter time frames. This is why we've transitioned from a society that produced goods and services that last a long time to the replace society. Instead of fixing things, we now replace things. And this can go on and on here, but I believe I made my point. And it's essential on top of that point to emphasize that that has to get worse. When you have a form of money that is reliant on the lie that we can print energy into existence, the lie that we can create something out of nothing, like de facto gods, well, inherently, there are only two options. That has to reset back to truth, or the lie has to continue. And likewise with today, that's what we face. Either we have to face the truth that our money is distorted, or we'll continue to believe the lie. And for the lie to survive, it must grow. It must become more absurd. Prices must become more detached from reality. Wealth must continue to be diverted towards the misallocators and towards the distorters, and away from those that are actually producing energy in the society, away from those that are actually producing the economic value in society. And that's where we get into the fears of a central bank digital currency, where we get to more and more inflationary fears, where we get into Social Security becoming insolvent here in the near future, Medicare and everything else. Obviously, there's dozens of examples that we won't go into now. But that's basically where we are. Energy, technology, money, corruption and historical examples, and where we are today. That's roughly the first third, the first half of the film. And it's important to emphasize again here that this is a project that is in the process of fundraising for. Let's see if I can share my screen here, but there's both a project on GoFundMe and a project on Geyser. So if you like what you hear so far, please consider donating, supporting it. Right now, there's a few million sats thrown its way, which is a few $100. I go into full length of what the film qualifies here, what the movie funds are going towards. And likewise, this is what we've covered so far. We've covered energy, technology, money, corruption in the modern world. And why do I start with that here? Because, I mean, you know, again, I've not even brought up Bitcoin yet in this outline of the film. Why is that the case that I've not done that if the whole film itself is about Bitcoin? And I think the essential thing to emphasize here is that, again, most people that don't understand Bitcoin in the way that I do, or in the way that many people watching this perhaps do, is that they don't care. They don't care about blockchain technology. They don't care about proof of stake versus proof of work, or this or that. You know, they simply don't care. And the reason is because they don't understand how it applies to them. And so I believe having so much of the film focus on these things that do apply to them and help them reframe their understanding of history, I think is critical. When you explain to somebody that society is rising and following all these dates and names and empires and this and that, none of it's random. It's that simple. That all life, all society comes down to energy, and that energy is able to increase as a function of technology. And we price all that technological improvement in monetary energy. And thus far in human history, we've been able to distort that. And so we've been able to distort everything. So we have these cycles of cycles. And obviously I'm really glossing over here, but that's the basic idea. And so anyway, to get back to the rest of the script here, the rest of the outline of the film, finally coming to Bitcoin, what's the solution? What's the solution to that? Are humans doomed to continue distorting our monetary energy in cycles again and again for human history? Well, yeah, very possible. Unless we're able to upgrade to the next level of energy in a way at which we could detach money from this human corruption, from this human greed, from this button to print energy out of nothing. Unless we're able to upgrade to a point at which we can do that, it's simply not possible. And this is the beautiful thing, such that Tesla, Ford, Fuller, and Finney and others predicted in the 20th century, was that eventually humanity would get to a point at which we had enough energy in the rest of society that we could finally innovate ourselves into a way of detaching humanity from monetary energy. And it's incredible, these predictions. I won't get into them now, but essentially, what does that look like? What does that require? Well, what you need is you need a way for information to be spread across society, across the globe. You need it to be spread virtually instantaneously, and you need it to require a brute force physical cost in order to maintain. You need this form of digital information to have a physical expenditure to it, because otherwise you could simply duplicate that information and then create infinite money. You have the same problem that you did before. And so essentially what you need to find is a way to marry the digital realm or the informational realm, informational units, monetary energy, something that can have a 100% monetary premium, along with something that's analog. And so something that essentially ties energy to information in a way that nothing else before it has been able to do. And so there have been many attempts at this. Tesla predicted this. Henry Ford attempted this in 1921. There were attempts in the 60s and the 70s, but especially the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. Many people tried to create this system, this form of money, this form of peer-to-peer cash, where monetary value could be exchanged, that was purely informational, but also had a component of energy tied to it, where it was incredibly expensive to create new forms of energy. And all these things failed for one way or another. Perhaps there was a bug in the code, perhaps there was corruption from the beginning, or perhaps that marriage didn't occur in the best way possible. The game theory wasn't there. But essentially what you have is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the first successful attempt, and to date, it's the only successful attempt at doing this. It's roughly 15 years old when this film was completed. It will probably be 15 years old at that point. Right now, it's only 14 years old. But essentially, what Bitcoin is, it is a communications system. It is a network that communicates monetary value that requires an extreme energy cost to produce more of. So, and so if we think again of energy upgrade in forms of layers, we can think of Bitcoin as being atop other layers of energy. You have natural wealth, you have natural energy of the world, you have the energy of the sun, you have the energy of water flowing down a river in a form of hydroelectric power, you have the energy in the atom that could be exploited through nuclear energy, both fusion and fission. You have power of fossil fuels and combustion, burning things. You have all these forms of energy, and those can be converted into electricity. That was a major upgrade. And these forms of electricity can be converted into information. That's computers. And then on top of computers, you have a way of communicating information instantaneously, and that's the internet. And now we've finally gotten to the point where we can combine these things from a top down, like a new base layer of communicating energy with one another. And that's simply what we call Bitcoin. I know that perhaps I'm not explaining it the best right now. I'm trying to get through this to the next point here, but that's essentially what Bitcoin is it's a way at communicating monetary energy and within a network that also is outside of any singular human, or outside of any singular point at which it could be exploited, and that infinite printing energy button simply cannot be pressed, unlike all the forms of energy in the past, including gold, including copper, including silver, and other forms of commodity money. And so if this is correct, that the dominant proof of work time chain, which in this case is Bitcoin, if it's correct that this form of monetary energy is actually perfect, quote unquote, meaning that there's no inflation or deflation in the supply of monetary units, if that's correct, what are the benefits to society? And the simple answer, the simple answer is that inherently we cannot understand. In the same way that humans in previous levels of energy production and consumption could not understand or fathom or communicate the advancement of energy in the future, the advancement of technology in the future, the amount of prosperity in the future, in the same way we simply can't put a finger on it, because it solves problems we don't even realize are problems today. It solves problems that we don't even realize are solvable or are fixable. And so to run through some of those, and this is really the point of the film that I will be very passionate about, and I think will really begin to blow people's minds, is what if in creating this perfect money, monetary energy no longer flows back to assets and back to goods and services and food and other things in society, but it actually flows to where it should be, where productivity gains are not being distorted to a small select few, but instead are flowing down to the base layer of society, flowing down to that monetary layer of society, instead of assets becoming more and more expensive and going up at a compounded rate every single year. Instead, their prices do what they should have been doing this whole time, and actually deflate, actually go down and continue to go down into the future. And by demonetizing these assets, that is a huge implication to society. Housing becomes more affordable. The ability to buy food becomes more affordable. Transportation becomes more affordable. This is one of, if not the dominant problem for the entire developing world and the 7 billion people, 6, 7 billion people outside of what we call the West. These people need cheaper energy. They need cheaper energy. They need cheaper food. They need cheaper housing. And if we're able to find a way to have all that monetary energy flow out of investing in a mixed basket of goods, instead back into money, well, all of a sudden the value or the cost of these things go down, and that cost to benefit ratio improves better and better exponentially for billions of people across the earth. And that also means, therefore, that monetary exploitation becomes increasingly difficult, because the cost to benefit attack, it becomes in favor of the people that are currently being exploited. Right now, I'm in the United States, and the terrifying truth, the painful truth for us here in the United States and Europe, Japan, and our allies in the West here, is that we are exploiting the rest of the world. By our ability to print energy, by our ability to print monetary energy and give it to the rest of the world in exchange for their natural resources, we are stealing from them. When we give out these loans, whether it's the United States or the IMF or China, when these nations, they have the ability to have a reserve currency status, whether it's the global reserve currency or a reserve currency of a given area of the world, a given region of the world, that nation essentially has the ability to have a form of monetary colonialism and exploit these other nations in the world, to exploit billions of people for their time, for their labor, and for their natural resources as a direct benefit to themselves and an expense to them. And so if we're able to have money outside the control of these nations, outside the control of these people in charge, all of a sudden you can stop that exploitation. And now the productivity gains are no longer exploited for the rich at the expense of the poor, but all members of that monetary network are able to enjoy and benefit in the productivity gains of society. This also means not just in comparing wealthy nations versus poor nations, but also wealthy individuals versus poor individuals. Wealth inequality is inevitable. It will always be the case, because productivity has a Pareto distribution, and it's always going to be distributed unequally. However, the reason wealth inequality gets so much worse in periods of rapid monetary debasement and in periods where society believes the lie that we can print energy into existence, the reason is because those with power, those with influence, those that are able, again, to manage and mismanage the money, those people are able to are able to basically rob the lower classes. So not only do we have a form of monetary colonialism between wealthy nations and poorer nations, but we also have a form of exploitation between those that are able to print money and those that are not able to print money. So at the very baseline, that's already three major problems of society that are alleviated. Number one, demonetizing assets and making these things more affordable for billions of people. Number two, stopping this monetary exploitation of billions of people. And number three, stopping this unjust wealth inequality and this unjust corporatism and crony capitalism. Those alone are beautiful things and incredibly transform society in ways that we can barely understand. But not only is there a monetary component, again, Bitcoin should not just be thought of as Bitcoin. It should be thought of as bit watts or bit power, bit energy, because again, money is just energy. It's simply money is a name at which we've given this kind of energy. Money is the name at which we've given this kind of abstract societal trust. It's simply energy. And so not only, and this is what most people miss, not only does Bitcoin have benefits at making money more equal and money more fair, Bitcoin has the benefit of causing all forms of society to upgrade because money is just energy and all of society is energy. And so one example is a more stable grid. If you have a form of global money that requires a brute force physical cost to produce, to create, to issue, let's say, well, then what happens is that you have a buyer of last resort, literally anywhere on the planet, literally for any form of energy on the planet. So now you've done two things there. You've created a more stable grid because now these grids are able to justify a higher margin so that when the given locale, the given society requires a higher energy expenditure, all of a sudden that grid is able to adjust upwards for that profitably and not fail. So Bitcoin and mining for Bitcoin and Bitcoin infrastructure is able to reduce stress on grids. And there are many examples of which we're already seeing this, especially in the United States and in Africa, which I won't get into here, but that's a beautiful thing. That means less blackouts, less brownouts, and less disasters for people where energy is not yet stabilized, and not only preventing an unstable grid here, but also expanding the grid in other parts of the world, because all of a sudden people are able to integrate without having to connect to the centralized grid of Western nations today. Not only are more people able to use energy more consistently via a more stabilized grid, but they're able to divert more towards renewable energies of renewable resources. One of the essential problem with renewable resources today is that we are not able to produce them at scale profitably. We're able to innovate them. We're able to improve that cost to benefit ratio at producing energy. But the ultimate problem is that fossil fuels simply are more efficient. And that's why we should not get rid of fossil fuels. We should not outlaw them. We should not ban them. It's simply the energy level that we're at right now. But inevitably, we need to upgrade to the next level, which is mass renewable energy that is also profitable. We simply can't have a utopia of renewable energy that is all operating at a loss because it's unreliable, or it's dependent on the sun, or it's dependent on wind, or it's dependent on something that simply is not as reliable as turning something on and burning it. And for that to happen, the single highest need for upgrading to that next level of energy production, the single highest need is having that buyer of last resort 24/7, 365 days a year that is able to make that energy profitable. So not only does Bitcoin reduce wealth inequality, not only does it reduce exploitation between wealthy nations and impoverished nations, but it is the single greatest incentive to expanding renewable energy, to helping us upgrade out of fossil fuels without destroying society. And this is one of the problems with many climate alarmists and many things, and I won't get into this rant right now. This is reserved for another time, but this is one of the main problems. You don't help society upgrade to the next level by focusing on the negatives of the current level and forcing us back down to the previous one. That doesn't work. It's actually worse for the environment. It's worse for human life. You're forcing death onto the very poorest people of the world for the value of what? Acting like you're virtuous? No. The answer is to help us upgrade to the next level as fast as possible. And the way to do that is magnifying the energy use of that era. And so not only do we have an upgrade of monetary energy, not only do we have an upgrade in the global form of energy production as a whole, but also we have informational upgrades that are associated with that as well. You have artificial intelligence, you have better supercomputers all the time. All these things simply add to the case of the need of a finite money. When you have infinite artificial intelligence, when you have infinite information, you need a way to communicate value, because if money is a language, if money is information, if you have infinite information, the information is no longer the money. And that's the world that we're in today. The largest companies in the world are simply information companies, because attention and information is our modern de facto currency right now, because we can't trust our underlying currency. That's the real value, is the information. It's not the money, because the money's being debased at 5 to 10% a year. The information is the value. But with artificial intelligence and all these other things, all of a sudden it no longer matters who has the information, because information is becoming increasingly centralized. So by having decentralized money, we're able to curb many of the negative consequences, or many of the negative potential consequences of artificial intelligence. And simply put, when you have an infinite amount of something, its price only continues to lower in relation to everything else. For example, the water in this bottle, or the oxygen in this air, is virtually free. I don't know the last time that I paid for oxygen. I don't know the last time you paid for oxygen, or the last time we counted oxygen in our GDP. It's because we have so much of it. We have so much of this prosperity of oxygen and nitrogen molecules around us that there simply isn't a price for it. And with artificial intelligence, this is one of the things people fear. They fear, oh, well, artificial intelligence is going to ruin my jobs. The problem is not artificial intelligence destroying your job, because artificial intelligence is just producing more value. The real problem is that you don't have a way to store the value that you've produced. You don't have a way to store your value in political currency units. You simply don't have a way to do that. And so by having Bitcoin, by having this form of uncorruptible, immutable, and absolutely scarce money in the world, you negate that negative externality of artificial intelligence and future automation putting you out of a job. So anyway, I think I made the point there. You also could talk about Bitcoin being a default swap hedge and a better form of insurance on all global bond and debt markets. I won't get into that because that's too much for now. That may not even be in the final film. Then you come to tyranny. Dictatorships and regimes and authoritarian nightmares of history all survive as a function of being able to print money into existence, of this ability to distort information, of this ability to lie to society and pretend like that you can create something out of nothing. And so if we're able to destroy that lie, and destroy that lie from having any incentive of surviving or any ability to propagate and expand into the future, well, then all of a sudden you diverted almost all the funding away from these tyrannies and away from these regimes back toward productivity of society, back towards the things that actually produce value and the things that actually produce energy in society. You know, right now there are 20 million people or so, I believe, in North Korea. There's 1 million people in camps in China. There's millions of people in Africa and other parts of Asia and South America that are under regimes that are funded by dictators and people in power that are able to print money out of thin air and then are able to exploit the nation by being in this monetary exploitation with wealthy nations, and basically suck these nations dry, suck their people's labor, the value of their people's labor dry at the benefit of themselves and the benefit of them. So not only is there international benefit there in reducing that exploitation, but there's also the benefit in reducing exploitation of the tyrants of these nations. And that right there is tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of lives. And then you get into the Cultural Revolution, when you have a form of money that actually incentivizes responsibility, when you have a money that actually incentivizes long-term thinking, when you have a money that actually incentivizes productivity instead of distortion, lies, corruption, and mistruths, you have the people that use that money actually focus on responsibility, that actually focus on the long-term future, that actually are able to think outside the short-term mindset, outside the extremely high time profits, outside of the theft of every single day. And this is why you see Bitcoiners talk about philosophy and talk about religion and talk about these things in a degree that the rest of the world, in an amount that the rest of the world simply doesn't do. It's because if you change that underlying informational system of society, you change the way people think. If you change the way people think, they actually start to think about more things that matter, because they're no longer having to speculate in assets to outpace the rate of monetary deterioration. So ultimately, the thing I care about the most in all this is the benefit for human lives, and the benefit and the direct human cost that distorting money has. on the world today. Most wars are extended, caused, or worsened by the ability to lie and print money out of thin air. If you're able to print bombs out of thin air, you're able to exploit the rest of the world simply because you have the power to cause a lie. Millions of people, hundreds of millions of people have died in war and conflict as a direct result of this monetary distortion. And this is something I didn't even touch on now, but will in the film, that if we stay at this level, if we continue to have this form of monetary distortion today, we will end up in World War III, and it will be disastrous, and there will be a stunning amount of death, because there's no other way. When resources are distorted to this magnitude, and they're only able to become further distorted, further away from the truth, it's inevitable that nations go to war with each other, because all of a sudden, even though the cost of attack is so high, the benefit's worth it, because you're so deep in the lie that the only way is to come back to truth, and the only way to come back to truth is through violence. At least that's how it's been thus far in human history. And so it's crucial, it is imperative that we find a way to come back to truth, come back to monetary truth without violence. And I genuinely believe Bitcoin is that answer. I genuinely believe Bitcoin can help us avoid a war, avoid revolutions, and avoid tyrannies and calamities like this into the future. I genuinely believe that Bitcoin can reduce this lies and disruption out of food production, out of the healthcare industry, out of education, out of government lobbyists and mismanagement, and all this political, it is on and on and on. There are so many direct benefits to society if you simply destroy the bad incentives to further corrupt society. It's truly amazing once you do the math. Tens of millions, hundreds of millions, perhaps even a couple billion lives, billions of preventable deaths over the next 100 years, next 200 years, could be avoided simply by removing this incentive structure, or removing the ability to create incentive structures that incentivize society towards energy manipulation versus energy production versus energy responsibility. And so ultimately, that's why Bitcoin matters, because all life forms are forms of energy. All civilizations are forms of energy that function inherently on technology. All technologies are denominated into money. And if we're able to separate that corruption from money, all of a sudden that unleashes technology, that unleashes humanitarian efforts, and that unleashes prosperity for billions of people on the planet, perhaps everyone on the planet. So ultimately, and this is where the film concludes, what is the value of Bitcoin if these things are correct? If this view of the world is correct, and if Bitcoin is this thing that which we think it is, and if Bitcoin could have these direct impacts on society, what's the future value of Bitcoin? Future value of Bitcoin is inherently different than the way at which most of society views the value of Bitcoin. Even people that think Bitcoin has a future, you cannot price that future energy communications network within the current energy communications network. You can't price a Boeing 747 in terms of Roman catapults. You can't price a modern light bulb in terms of 13th century textiles or whatever. You can't price a Kindle in terms of the Gutenberg printing press. You simply can't denominate these future forms of energy in previous forms of energy. And likewise, if Bitcoin is a superior form of monetary energy compared to current forms of monetary energy, there is simply no crossover. It simply makes absolutely no sense. There is no logical fiat price for Bitcoin. Not $27,000, not $27 million, not $27 billion. Eventually, if Bitcoin is correct, inherently, it will be priceless in terms of political currency units, because there's an infinite number of political currency units, and there's a finite amount of Bitcoin. And that is going to be a major emphasis in the film, because far too often people don't realize that. That's the thesis. That's the case for Bitcoin. Either Bitcoin works or it doesn't. Law of conservation of energy, open and closed systems. It's just physics, it's just math. Either it works or it doesn't work. Either it is a monetary system in which there is no corruption, no ability for humans to cause corruption, in which case it is infinitely worth more than all systems that do have that flaw, that do have that exploit. In the same way, the airplanes that cannot fly are inherently worthless compared to airplanes that can fly. It's the same thing. And that must be emphasized to people as they learn about energy, as they learn to proof of work, and as they learn about Bitcoin's benefits to society. If this is true, then there is no logical exchange rate. And if there is no logical exchange rate, the idea of buying Bitcoin to sell it for a profit later is inherently idiotic. It is inherently nonsensical. You don't buy Bitcoin to take profits on it later. You buy Bitcoin, and that's the profits themselves, because you're selling the assets for money. You're selling inferior forms of energy for superior forms of energy. When you buy a stock, in order to get more currency units, you are selling what you believe is an inferior form of energy for a superior form of energy. And it's the same thing with Bitcoin. If Bitcoin is the monetary singularity we think it is that final form of monetary energy. And all of the forms of energy, all of the forms of monetary premium are inferior to that. With every other asset, you make money when you sell. With Bitcoin, you make money when you buy. You do not save in cash, in political currency units, as I will call them throughout the film. You do not save in those because they're not accurate reflections of energy. You save in Bitcoin because it is an accurate reflection of energy. It is a sound language of monetary energy for society. And so, and that's so important to emphasize. And that's why so much of the film is emphasizing on the problem first and really articulating the problem, and then emphasizing how Bitcoin inherently fixes so many secondary problems by first solving that first fundamental problem. You can't solve the rest of society and eventually fix the money. You have to solve that problem of money, and then you can see the rest of the benefits propagate throughout society. And so when you do save in Bitcoin, you aren't seeing the price of Bitcoin go up in relation to everything else. You are seeing that marginal cost of energy production continue down towards zero. You're not seeing Bitcoin go up in relation to everything else. You're seeing everything else in relation fall down against Bitcoin. Because if we assume humanity continues to be that organism, if human society continues to become a better and better organism that's able to produce more energy, consume more energy, and transfer more energy, then we should assume that we're able to create more real estate, that we're able to build more buildings, taller buildings, make more land, better, more efficiently use more land. If we can do that, there's a theoretical the amount of real estate, the amount of housing, the amount of land that is able to be used should just continue to trend towards infinity forever. In the same way that the amount of oxygen we're able to breathe is essentially infinite, this land will essentially become more infinite, because as the price of these things go up, that's a communications mechanism which are able to bring them down. It's the same with real estate. It's the same with stocks. It's the same with gold. It's the same with every security and every other commodity on the face of the planet. Bitcoin is the only thing that when its price inflects upwards, it is not able to have an increased supply cap, which is what makes it a superior store of monetary value, which is what I mean by it being monetary singularity. And so if you understand it that way, then what you're seeing is not Bitcoin's price appreciating forever. You are seeing the cost of everything else in the world depreciate forever, as is what is logical when you understand that society is simply upgrading to higher and higher forms of energy. So essentially, we have less in common with the future than the past, because every upgrade of energy is greater than all the previous upgrades of energy previously. And if Bitcoin is this idea of upgrading energy from one form to the next form, from an inferior form to superior form, you inherently cannot price that in terms of the current form of energy. And so I know I got really abstract here. I'm really rushing through this here. But essentially, the closing argument with the film is that if that's the case, then it is imperative that every person get off a 0% allocation to Bitcoin. Not because Bitcoin is going to make you rich, not because Bitcoin is a get rich quick thing, not because it's a speculation, but because it is the tool, it is the technology, it is the form of energy communication at which destroys the need to speculate, that destroys the need to gamble faster than the rate at which we're able to print money or print energy into existence. So that's the case for Bitcoin, to outline these steps one at a time, to first talk about energy, talk about technology being a way at which we transfer energy, to talk about money being the way at which all technology is priced in, to talk about corruption being the inherent problem behind money and why money causes these cycles in history, to talk about the modern world where we're heading today if this corruption in money continues, to talk about how Bitcoin is a system that takes corruption out of the ledger, to talk about the benefits to society if we were to have money without this form of corruption, and then to talk about the actual material value of that network, and that value is priceless in terms of our current understanding of economics and our current understanding of money. So that was a lot. I hope I did well. This production quality was not the best, and like I said before, I did that for a purpose. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully this is of use. And if you think that something like this, refined, expanded upon, and made visually engaging, would be an excellent piece of information to direct people towards, it would mean a lot if you would support this film financially and give some of your monetary energy towards the mission of this film. I hope to make a product that is worthy of 1 million views. And if that's the case, and we assume a 2.1% conversion rate of views into Bitcoiners, then that means 21,000 people. 21,000 people because 21 million, and that's the goal. That's the vision. If you have suggestions on what to refine for this progression of ideas, I'm very open to hearing. But yeah, that's the case for Bitcoin, and that's the case for the movie, The Case for Bitcoin. So again, here, there's a Geyser link and a GoFundMe link. If you find this useful, let's see if I can, yeah, there we go. So yeah, you can find A Case for Bitcoin on Geyser. The movie trailer is there. I highly encourage you look at that on my YouTube channel. My previous explanation similar to this is most popular video to date, got about 10,000 views. And then likewise, you can see the trailer for the film over here, The Case for Bitcoin trailer, posted a couple weeks ago at the time of this recording. And it's basically gives a kind of the visual sense that this film will go for, in the same way that this presentation here is giving that. So as well as a GoFundMe, you can find explanation there. And again, the outline of the topics that will be addressed. At time of recording, I've got just under 15,000 followers. So my hope is, if let's say 20,000 people actually follow me. If one in, let's see, if one in, what would that be? If 1 in 20, so 1,000 people donated $30, then that would be more than enough to fund the project, to fund the cost of production. I'm donating all my time to the script, and believe me, I'm doing my best to make it as understandable as possible, make it as simple as possible. I know I stuck with a lot of abstract ideas in this presentation here, but really breaking those abstract ideas down into practical terms is a major focus of mine for the script. So anyway, all I have to say is that if 1 in 20, just 5% of people that follow me and support me and enjoy my work, have enjoyed my visual aids, have enjoyed my presentation style, and have enjoyed the points that I've made, if just 5% of them are able to give $30, 30 garbage political currency units are going to zero anyway, that would fund the film. And that means that, hopefully if the film has the reach that it does, roughly $1 would orange pill, quote unquote, one new person. So if someone's able to give $30, which is, by the way, enough to be put in the credits. I have to have a cap somewhere, and that seems somewhere that was logical. Then that means that you could orange pill 20 to 30 people. So that's the hope. So anyway, appreciate your time, appreciate your support. Please consider donating if you think that this is a viable idea. And if you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. So with all that to say, thanks.